In this video, I will explain how we are going to prove that a formula is a WFF or a non-WFF using the definition of a WFF or a well-formed formula. So first, let's review the definition of a well-formed formula. So the definition of a well-formed formula, as I explained in the previous video, goes as follows. So any capital letter is a well-formed formula. So this is clause 1. So any capital letter, A through Z, is a well-formed formula, and clause 1 says so. A dash followed by a well-formed formula is a well-formed formula. So basically what this clause 2 says is that we can take any well-formed formula and we can put a negation in front of it. So put a negation to the left of the formula and we still have a well-formed formula. Clause 3 says a left-hand grouper followed by a well-formed formula, followed by a dyadic connective. One of the connectives, dyadic connectives are the ones that join two formulas. So ampersand, wedge, arrow, or double arrow, followed by another well-formed formula, followed by a matching right-hand grouper, is a well-formed formula. Now, I want to say a quick note about, first of all, basically what this clause is saying is that we can take any two well-formed formulas and we can stick them together. We can join them with either ampersand, wedge, arrow, or double arrow. But a quick comment about the parentheses, about the left hand and the right hand groupers. Technically, according to the definition, in order to be a well-formed formula, you have to have those on any well-formed formula that is more than just a capital letter or a capital letter followed by a capital letter with a negation on it. However, for let's say the formula A arrow B, technically we should have parenthesis A arrow B close parenthesis. However, those parentheses aren't actually doing any work. When we actually need parentheses is when we are joining more than just two WFFs with these dyadic connectors, because then the parentheses help us differentiate between different, not necessarily logically equivalent statements. So when you're doing this definition, and I'll go over this as we sort of do some examples, you can put the parentheses on or not, but you just got to remember that there will be points where you absolutely need to put them on. And I'll explain as I go through a sample derivation when that happens. Okay. And then finally, clause 4, you're never going to use clause 4 in any of the derivations. Clause 4 just says basically there's no other way to be a well-formed formula except through clauses 1, 2, or 3, or some combination thereof. Okay, so now let's see how we're going to use this definition in order to try to derive a formula. I'm calling it a derivation. It's not really a derivation, but it has definitely similarities with what we will see later when we do derivations, when we do proofs. Basically, what we're doing is we're trying to build the formula up piece by piece. And either we will succeed, in which case it's a well-formed formula, or we will fail. And we will fail in such a way that we'll see that there is no way that we could succeed, in which case we have shown that it is not a well-formed formula. So I will show an example of each so you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's go back to Blackboard. So I'm going to do this in Blackboard because I could do this in like a word processor, and you can, by the way, do that or on a piece of paper and then transfer it to Blackboard. But I thought it would be easiest to do it in Blackboard. It's probably easiest for you. And there's some things that we might want to talk about how you're going to do it if you're doing it actually in Blackboard. Okay, so I'm not going to do the formula that is here. Instead, I'm going to just do another formula. So I'm just going to, you wouldn't normally put the formula in your derivation. So I'm going to take that out later, but I'm just putting it there for reference. So my first line is going to be what your first line would be. So the first thing I'm going to do anytime I do one of these derivations is I'm just going to build all the capital letters. You don't have to do it that way. You could build, let's say for this formula, you could build W, and then you could build X, and then you could build not W, and then you could put those two together, not W ampersand X, right? And then you could negate it, and then you could move on to the second half of the formula, to what comes after the arrow, and build that up piece by piece. You can do it however you want to, as long as you just have to make sure that you build the pieces you need before you build something bigger. So for example, I could not build the formula parenthesis y wedge z close parenthesis wedge q. I could not build that formula if I didn't already have the formulas y wedge z and the formula q on an earlier line. Make sense, I hope? Okay, so I'm going to just build all of the capital letters. So I'm going to give, so each formula that I'm building is going to be on a separate line, and I'm going to give them all numbers. That doesn't matter right now, but it will down the road. We're going to need to refer to these numbers. So we need to earlier lines, so we need to give them numbers to make it clear what line we're referring to. Okay, so W is a well-formed formula. Then I'm going to put some white space in between my formula and, what comes after it. No, that doesn't work. Sorry. I was hoping that I could do tab, and you can't do that. Tab actually just takes you to the next question. So just put some spaces in. It doesn't really matter, just enough that it's sort of visually separate from the formula. It just makes it easier to read. So then now we need to put the justification. What makes this a well-formed formula? Well, it's clause 1. Because clause 1 says that any capital letter is a well-formed formula. Okay, then I hit return and I do the next line. So I'm going to build X. And I don't need to worry about getting those all, you could be really anal and get those like all lined up perfectly. I don't care about that. Just make it easy for me to read. Okay, so then I'm going to build Y. And I can make my life easy. Since I keep typing clause 1, I'm just going to copy that in there. Okay, then I need the formula Z. And then I need the formula Q. Okay, so that takes care of all of the capital letters. So all of the atomic formulas, they're called, in the formula as a whole. So now I need to just start building that up, and I can do that however I want. I'm going to start with, first I'm going to build the antecedent of the conditional, and then I'll work on the consequent. So before I can build this antecedent, I need to build all of the parts. So before I can negate this formula, not W and X, I need to build that. But before I can build that, I've got an X, but I need a not W. So I'll do that next. So 6, not W. And now we ask ourselves, well, what makes that a well-formed formula? Well, that's a well-formed formula because W is a well-formed formula, which we already proved on line 1. So we want to reference that, line 1, and then we're applying clause 2 to line 1, right? Because clause 2 says that any well-formed formula with a negation in front of it is also a well-formed formula. So that's what makes line 6 a well-formed formula. Clause 2, and the fact that we know that W is a well-formed formula because we proved that on line 1. Okay, so now I need to make not W and X. Not W ampersand X. Now, again, this is a place where technically I should have parentheses on this. But the parentheses at the moment aren't doing anything. Like, it makes no logical difference if they're there or they're not. So I'm going to leave them off. You can put them on or you can take them off, whatever sort of makes the most sense to you or makes you feel the most comfortable or makes it so that you don't mess up things down. It might make it easier for you to not mess things up later down the road. So if that's the case, then you should put them on. Okay, so now we need our justification. So what makes this a well-formed formula? Well, we're going to be using clause 3, right? And because clause 3 is about taking two formulas and sticking them together with one of the dyadic connectors, in this case, the ampersand. So what's going to make this a well-formed formula is if on previous lines we've established that not W is a well-formed formula and also that X is a well-formed formula. Well, and we have done so. So not W, we established that at line 6. Then X, we established that that was a well-formed formula on line 2. So we need to cite that. And I need to know how to spell and. And then what clause justifies it? That's clause 3. Okay. So now we're going to form the formula not. It's false that not W ampersand X. So here's where we need the formulas. Because if we don't have the here's where we need the parentheses. If we don't put the parentheses on, then we end up with a different formula than what we should be having. So instead of negating the whole formula, not W and X, we would instead be just adding another negation on the W. And those are different formulas. So basically, when you need to put those parentheses in is when you are doing something else with that formula on line 7. So either negating it or joining it to another WFF with one of those dyadic connectors. So we definitely need the parentheses now. Otherwise, we'll have created a different formula than the one that we're trying to create. In fact, we would be creating a formula that we could not create at this point. So, here's a thing that just happened. Let me zoom in because I've been noticing this happening in a number of people's proofs. So see how that period just appeared? I did not put that period there. So that's something that Blackboard's doing. So you need to watch out for that. Because if I leave that period in there, that makes my formula not a well-formed formula because a period is not a symbol in our language. So it's basically, I just put gibberish in there. So I want you to take those out. I'm going to wait till I've typed some other things. Well, no, actually, let's go back and just take it out. And let's see, it appears. So it's trying to be helpful. It thinks I made a sentence somehow. And so it's trying to be helpful, saying, if you make a sentence, you need to put a period on the end of it. So what we'll do is we'll just put our spaces in, we'll put our justification, and then we'll go back and take it out. And then it should stay out. Then it will know I mean it. Okay, so what justifies this as a well-formed formula? Well, clause 2 says that if the formula not W and X is a well-formed formula, then its negation is a well-formed formula. So because we have that formula on line 7, and then we applied clause 2 to it, that makes that a well-formed formula. So now I'm going to take this period out, and now when I hit return, see, it doesn't reappear. So good. Okay, so line 9, now I need to build the consequence. So y wedge z, wedge q, with parentheses around the y wedge z. So y wedge z is one woof that I need to make, and then I need the woof q, and then I can put them together. So first I have to build the y wedge z. So I can do that if I have the well-formed formulas y and z already, and I do on lines 3 and 4. So that's by line 3 and 4, clause 3. Okay, and now I want to put that together with a wedge Q, and Q is on line 5. So again, I'm going to need parentheses to make it clear that y wedge z is a chunk that I'm putting together, right? It's a well-formed formula. And then Q is its own formula. Excuse me. Because if I leave the parentheses out, well, first of all, if I leave the parentheses out, then I don't have a well-formed formula because it breaks the two-chunk rule. So putting the parentheses in maintains that two-chunkness. Okay. So I'm going to put in some spaces. So that was line 9 and I believe 5, but let me double check that because you don't want to say the wrong line numbers or your proof will be wrong. So line 5 and then clause 3. Now that I've done that, I'm ready to create my final formula. So I just need to stick together that it's false that not W and X that I created on line 8, and then the parentheses Y wedge Z, close paren, wedge Q that I just created. Okay. A word about copying and pasting also. So at this point, I could just copy and paste this whole formula. So maybe, it's the formula you've got right up here, right? You could copy and paste that at this point. But here's the thing about copying and pasting symbols in Blackboard is that sometimes they'll break and turn into gibberish. I haven't had it happen a lot with these kind of questions. This kind of setup tends to preserve basically it goes, oh, I know what that is in HTML, so I can do that. But particularly fill in the blank questions, I would not advise that you copy and paste it. So that's just my 2 cents. I'd advise you to, at all times, just use the keyboard shortcuts that I have listed up above. Okay. So just type them by hand and they'll never break. So I wanted, it's false that not W and X arrow. Let's make sure that's correct. That's what I wanted. So now, again, I need more punctuation. So technically, I could have, on line 10, I could have or should have put in brackets, but they weren't doing anything at that point. So I like to leave them off just because it's cleaner, but it's your call. Y, wedge, Z, but you definitely need them now. Now it is not your call. And that is based on line, that was line 8 and 10, clause 3. One thing about the line numbers here, I don't care. I tend to cite the line that I use first. So that happened to be line 8. And then the second line, but it doesn't actually matter. Order doesn't matter there. So if you had said line 10 and line 8, comma, clause 3, that would have worked just fine. And that's my proof. Since I was able, through successive applications of the different clauses in the definition of a well-formed formula, I was able to build up the formula that I was asked to build, no problem. This is a well-formed formula, and this proves it. Okay, now let's look at another example that is not a well-formed formula. So we'll just go down to another space, we'll type it in. Oh, sorry, and I should take this out now because it's not part of my proof. So I'll just tidy that up. All right, so here, now this formula is not a well-formed formula. And hopefully you can see just by looking at it, why not? And the reason why not, where we're going to run into difficulties, is right here in the antecedent of the conditional. Because the string, right, not W ampersand, right, we need something else here. We can't just stick an ampersand after a formula without another formula following it. There is no clause in the definition of the well-formed formula that would let us write something like this, not W ampersand. So that's where we're going to run into problems. And hopefully you can see that like right away. But if not, trying to build the formula, right, you should reach the point where you try to build that and you're like, wait, how do I do this? Can't do it. So that's what I want you to do. Just kind of go through those steps. So I want you to build as much of the formula as you can. And then if you can't go any further, you're just going to say stuck. Okay. So again, I'm just going to build all of the capital letters that I'm going to need. All of the capital letters that appear in the formula. See, put a period in. Now that time when I took it out, it left it out. So just watch for that. Silly Blackboard. So I'll go back and clean those all up at the end. Okay, so clause 1, right, says that all of these capital letters that I'm building are well-formed formulas. So I also needed a Z. Okay. So one thing about doing this on a piece of paper or on like a word processing document, you'll be able to see, like the window won't be so small. So you won't have to keep scrolling back and forth. So that's possibly an advantage. Whatever makes your life easier. Go ahead and do that. Just, here's the results you want to end up with. Okay, so now let's build this consequent. We're going to be able to build this no problem. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we want to first build X and Y. X ampersand Y. We can do that no problem because X is a well-formed formula on line 2, and Y is one also on line 3. And then clause 3 says we can stick them together. Now we want to stick together the formula X and Y with the formula Z. Again, no problem because we have X and Y. Need parentheses to maintain that as its own formula. Wedge Z. And that is a well-formed formula because we have the formula X and Y on line 5. And then we have Z on line 4. And then clause 3 says we can stick them together with a wedge. Now, let's look at the antecedent. Again, we want to build as much as we can. So can we build the formula not W? Absolutely. Since we have W as a well-formed formula on line 1, and clause 2 says we can negate that well-formed formula and we still have a well-formed formula, we can do that. So not W, I also accidentally put a space there, is a well-formed formula because W is a well-formed formula on line 1, and then clause 2 says we can negate that. Now, here's where we get stuck, right? So suppose I thought I could build this. Right? Suppose I thought I could build not W ampersand nothing. But then when I try to go and find a clause that would let me do it, right, I'm not going to find one, right? Clause 2 is the closest, sorry, clause 3 is the closest because it lets me put ampersands. That's how ampersands get into my formulas. But I need another well-formed formula to stick on the other side of the ampersand. And there isn't one in the string that I've been given to derive. So I'm not going to be able to validly derive this string using the definition of a well-formed formula. So I'm just going to write the word stuck here. And you don't want to put this formula and then write stuck as some kind of justification. That's not what I want you to do. That's maybe how I could have told you to do it, but it's not how I'm telling you to do it. I don't want any formulas in your derivation that are not well-formed formulas. So line 8 should be simply the word stuck. It just tells me that you're done with your derivation and you're done for a reason. You're done because you can't go any further. Now, suppose you had said stuck at line 7. Suppose you'd said, I'm stuck here because I can build X and Y, wedge Z, no problem, but I can't build not W ampersand. So I'm done. I would say, no, you're not, because not W. So not W ampersand is a problem, but there's nothing wrong with not W, right? That's a well-formed formula. So I want you to do all of the well-formed formulas that you can, obviously that are relevant. We could do all kinds of well-formed formulas. We could do well-formed formulas till the cows came home, but they wouldn't be relevant to the formula that we're trying to build. But not W is, right? Because supposing not W ampersand was a legitimate formula, well, we would need not W first before we could build it. So not W is a relevant step towards trying to derive the formula. So we're done, except for one thing. Remember those stray periods. So I would suggest just go through, well, you can do it however you want. I would do it at the end just because then you don't have to keep constantly doing it, but make sure you don't forget. So if you think you're likely to forget, then maybe it's better to do it as you go along. So after you write the justification, go back in and remove those periods that Blackboard is helpfully trying to include. Okay, so that's how you do the derivations that I'm asking you to. And there's an example there with where it is a WFF and also where it isn't. So hopefully that helps you as you're trying to do these exercises. All right. Any questions? As always, ask me in class or come to my office hours.